Hey guys, welcome back into Legacy. So just real fast, I wanted to do this video because this is going to be floating around for at least a couple of days. I want to do a video on it. And I want to hit some things that I think about the announcements that came out of Gen Con for WotC, particularly the Dark Sun setting, but it's going to apply to WotC in general. I am going to break kind of my rules a little bit because I'm going to get a little drama here, a little bit of drama going here, but and I know this is going to be kind of a divisive video, and that's fine. Uh, Feel free to disagree with me. I don't mind disagreement. So what makes life great is that we don't always agree. But that being said, let me go ahead and say what I'm going to say to start, which is I am not excited for Dark Sun. I am not excited for Wizards of the Coast handling Dark Sun uh, at all. I am not even cautiously optimistic at this point. And let me explain what I mean, and I'm hopefully going to do this as quick as possible. So I'm going to start this with a quote, and then I'm going to reiterate kind of how I feel. So George Washington once said, "Always associate with men of good character, for it's better to be alone than in bad company." And while that generally applies, he applied that as meant that as an application for your personal life. I believe it's also applicable for your everyday life when you're, especially when you're in a business that relies on selling to a broad consumer base. Uh, who you associate with matters. And uh, we could get into some of the bad business decisions that WotC has made, particularly the 2023, 2024 OGL debacle and all of that. Um, the quality of their work recently, all that kind of stuff can all be talked about. Their art being kind of terrible, use of AI and claiming it's not AI, some other things that they've done. Um, those are all issues, but I think the bigger issue that I have with WotC is who they associate themselves with over the last decade or so. Um, they have chosen to associate with some really terrible people. Um, and these people are not terrible because they have opinions I don't agree with. They are terrible because they hold views that are the antithesis to decency. Um, and by that, I mean, you don't get to tell me that I am not welcome because of the color of my skin, the gender I have, the sex I am, uh, where I live, any of that stuff. You don't get to decide that I'm a bad person because I don't fit your leftist worldview. And make no mistake, that's where a lot of that comes from. Um, it is very common in left wing circles and somewhat in right wing circles. If you want to get into the horseshoe theory of how the right and the left kind of come together in the middle, they definitely do. They do kind of horseshoe together. There's Ben Shapiro has done a lot of good talking about that. Some other people have talked about the horseshoe theory of the right and left. So if you want to get into that, yes, there are right wing people that are just guilty of this as the left, but it does tend to in the D&D space come mostly from left wing creators. Um, so I want to make that clear. And what it is it's bigoted, it's hateful, and it's absolutely inappropriate. Some of the things that have been said. Um, Telling white men they're not welcome in the hobby, particularly, is egregious. Um, like it or not, D&D is a white male hobby. Um, we could get into talking about why and all that, but that doesn't matter why. It is predominantly a white male hobby, and we have a place in it. Um, we have a place in it just like we have a place in everything as white men. Um, we have a place in society, whether these weirdos like that or not. White people deserve to be respected as human beings and dignified as human beings. Um, and when you hire people to front face your company uh, who make those kind of statements, uh, you destroy the goodwill of the consumer. Um, you hurt yourself when you make bad business decisions, but you can reverse bad business decisions. You can make amends on bad business decisions. You have a much harder time making amends for terrible behavior. Um, and this is going to kind of get into the meat of where I stand on WotC and why I don't care for WotC. You guys, whether you like it or not, and this goes with my brand, this goes with any brand, um, who you associate with matters because it reflects on you as the brand controller. So Hasbro and WotC, for example, are going to own those negative statements for a long time. They have to, because whether they like it or not, they were made by people using the imprimatur of WotC and D&D brand to make those statements. They use their connection to that brand to make those statements. And so whether WotC likes it or not, they are tied to those things. I'm going to use a personal story on something that I had to do and something I did do. The video's down. You can't find the comments. I deleted the comments. And you can't find the video because it's private. I don't remember which one it is because it's so long ago. But when I first started this channel, I had Varg Vikernes following me. If you don't know who Varg Vikernes is, look up Varg Vikernes. First off, he's a murderer. He is an outright, that is a statement of fact. He spent 20 years in prison for murder. He murdered Euronymous. He burned down churches. He's actively anti-Christian. He's bigoted as hell. He hates anyone who's not white European. He hates women. He is extremely misogynistic, and he is overtly anti-Semitic. Okay, I made a decision after he left some comments on one of my videos. I outright called him a raging anti-Semite and told him I didn't want him commenting on my videos. I did that because I did not want people associating myself with his views. I did not want people to confuse the idea that I believed what he believed. And I did it because I am not a bigot. I do not hate women. I do not hate Jewish people. I do not hate non-white Europeans. And that's how you have to be. And in the case of Wizards, they chose, when confronted by players and consumers about these statements, particularly the ones about white gamers needing to leave, white male gamers needing to leave, they doubled down and defended the people that made those statements instead of doing the respectful thing. I'm going to use the term respectful thing and saying we don't agree with them and we will not tolerate that kind of statement from our creatives. We're not going to have people in the marketplace making those statements. So they accepted those statements and then allowed them to stand with the imprimatur of and the approval of the D&D brand. And so now the goodwill has kind of evaporated. The goodwill around Wizards Coast has kind of evaporated, particularly among people who've been around the game a long time. Remember when the game was written by people who were typically apolitical. Even if they were political people, because there was no social media and stuff, we weren't exposed to it. So like I couldn't, I can now, but if you'd asked me 30 years ago, I couldn't have told you what Brahm's political opinions are. I probably still can't because I don't think Brahm has a huge social media footprint. If he does, I think his is pretty apolitical. But you know, Tony DiTerlizzi, I hate saying his name, TD, his Twitter feed and stuff and his website, fairly apolitical. I know they hold political views, and I don't know what they are though. But 30 years ago, you wouldn't have known. You know, when Monty Cook was writing Planescape with Zeb Cook in the 90s, you didn't know what Monty Cook and Zeb Cook's political opinions were, and because they weren't in their work, they weren't on Twitter, they weren't on podcasts, they weren't making statements like that. So a lot of the consumers that came from that era remember an era when the hobby was apolitical. It was free from that type of drama. Like I said, I don't make any mistakes that these guys have their political opinions and they're fully entitled to their opinions. What the problem was is when you voice those opinions and those opinions are offensive, highly offensive, to the point of being damaging, the company should have done something, and they didn't. So the goodwill that existed for people that would have been political or could have been political, and we just didn't know it. Um, there was still goodwill towards TSR later, Wizards of the Coast, once they purchased TSR, even into the early 2000s, because we weren't exposed to any of their, if there was any really negative behavior from those guys, we weren't exposed to it realistically. They didn't go to conventions and make those kind of statements and things like that. So the company managed to maintain goodwill because of that. And I think there's an argument to be made that in the 90s, a lot of companies in the 90s, um, particularly, like I said, 90s into the early 2000s, very likely uh, discouraged uh, their creatives from mixing their personal views with their professional views. Um, and that's why so much of early RPGs, um, I'd say middle RPGs, early RPGs is, it was just coming around into what it was going to become into like the late 80s. From 76 to about like 84, 85, it was kind of coming into what it was going to become. And then from 85 through, I'd say about 2005 would be what I'd call the middle years. Um, of RPG design. And I think a lot of people probably were discouraged from mixing those opinions and mixing their personal life with their professional life, um, because companies back then understood that you just didn't do that. You didn't do that, and it produced a lot of goodwill. Because when you picked up a D&D book in 1997, 1995, whatever, you knew you weren't going to get treated to a lecture, either in the book or because the creative was on Twitter or on a podcast or on a panel at Gen Con or something and was going to say something stupid. And that was a good thing. And what has happened since is, particularly Wizards of the Coast is really notorious for this. Some other companies make political statements, but they're not quite as crass or as offensive. Some of them are. I've got companies that I don't buy from because of that. That's a personal choice. I'm not going to get into who they are. Um, but the companies have chosen to become more political and allow a lot of mixture of the personal with the professional. Um, and Wizards has ruined its goodwill. Any goodwill that existed from about 2014 to about 2017, 2016, 2017 is gone, for fifth edition in particular, into 5.5. It's just gone because there's so many bad things that have been said. And at the end of the day, they've associated themselves with um, a, I'm going to say a movement because I don't know other word to use. Um, they've associated themselves with a movement that uh, is very open with its bigotry, very open with its intolerance. Um, and that's very unfortunate that they've associated themselves with that movement. And like I said, it's not done because, you know, Wizards is like some evil cackling corporation. It was done because over the last 15 years or so, maybe 20 years, we've seen a movement in the corporate space where companies were pressured, not just RPG companies, companies in general were pressured to be more politically and socially active. Um, and Wizards fell into that trap. Paizo fell into that trap. A lot of companies have fallen into that trap. The one thing I'll say for Paizo, though, guys, I know a lot of people don't like Paizo's politics because they have some people they employed that have some pretty onerous views themselves. Um, Paizo isn't nearly as bad as Wizards is. Um, some of their guys are, but most part they're not. Um, they might be getting worse now. I don't really follow Paizo as much, but they don't seem as bad as Wizards is when it comes to the kind of statements that I'm talking about. So at the end of the day, all we have to judge whether or not Wizards is going to handle something like Dark Sun in particular, which is a very, very heavy setting. Uh, Genocide, murder, forced breeding, sexual assault, slavery, cannibalism, all these really, 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 really dark themes. Um, I don't trust that they're going to handle Dark Sun properly based on their history, based on the people associated with the brand. Um, they they they'll call something they don't like racist to make people shut up. But what are they going to do when they're dealing with a setting where racism is kind of a fundamental part of Dark Sun, especially when you get into things like the mole. The mole are untrusted. They're hated. They're kind of freaks of nature, half giant, half dwarf kind of creatures. They're freaks of nature. So if you look into Dark Sun, in 1990s, you'll see a lot of that. So I don't, based on how they've associated themselves, based on who they've brought in to be affiliated with the company, I don't trust them to handle Dark Sun. I don't trust them to respect the source materials. Um, I don't expect them to take the Dragon Kings, for example, um, and make them what the Dragon Kings are supposed to be, which is this ultimate form of evil. Dragon Kings are basically liches on crack. Um, if you read about them, they're incredibly evil beings. They are incredibly evil people that turn into the Dragon Kings. Um, you know the and then you can get into oh, sorry guys. Then you can get into things like the environmental undertones of Dark Sun being heavily filtered through the personal opinions of the people writing it. The battle between the defilers and the preservers. Um, you know, where preservers are trying to bring life back to Athas and the defilers are draining it out at the same time. And if you read the lore, there's actually a lot more defilers than there are preservers. Preserver mages are incredibly rare because if you read the setting, magic comes directly from the earth. And what happens in Dark Sun is as you cast spells, if you're a defiler, it saps the life out of the earth and nothing can grow and it can basically blights the land. There's massive wars that turned Athas into what it is. And yeah, and if you get into all that, I just don't trust that they're going to handle it properly. I just don't trust it. I don't believe they're going to be capable of doing that based on what I just said. I think they've associated with the wrong type of people who see things um, purely through their personal opinions. They aren't able to separate their personal views of the world from their professional views. Um, Plenty of people uh, that are on the left have written novels, done movies, whatever, that feature these types of events, these types of themes, and have done it with the right touch over the years. But it was because they were capable of putting aside their personal opinions for the purpose of creating art. And I just, like I said, I don't know that that's going to happen. I just don't know that that's going to happen. So at the end of the day, Wizards, the way that they're going to earn back the goodwill that they've earned is got to be kind of threefold. It's going to be threefold. The first is Wizards, they have to disassociate from the bad actors um, completely. Any contract or anybody that they've associated with that has made these kind of statements and said these kind of stupid things on stage, whatever, they have to disassociate. Um, that's a huge thing. That's the first thing. The second thing they have to gut the company. Realistically, they have to gut the company. They need to get rid of a mass amount, a majority of the company, including the C-suite. Um, they just have to. Um, because either they allowed it to happen, they did it themselves, or they actively encouraged it through different means. So they've got to gut and get rid of the company itself. That's the second part. And the third thing they have to do is they need to bring in people who really respect the history of D&D, um, and rebuild from the ground up. And what they're doing is they are definitely, and I think this is true, they are definitely trying, I think, to fix the damage, but you can't fix the damage if you continue to hold on to the people that caused It'd be like knowing somebody burned down a house and then employing them to rebuild it. It doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. You can't employ the arsonist anymore. You have to get rid of them. So, long story short, if you don't, I'm sorry guys, I am choking like crazy. If you want to know how to fix the problems with Wizards, if you want to know what it would take for me to go back to purchasing Wizards products, honestly, it's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take a lot of groveling. Um, and it's going to take a very sincere apology, not these half-hearted apologies they've been giving. Uh, Part of the apology will have to be removal of the source, because an apology to me is not legitimate if you're saying, "Well, we're so sorry, person X said that white people are bad," but you keep employing them. It, it doesn't work. It just doesn't work for me. So at the end of the day, we have to come to terms with that. We have to, lack of a better way of putting it, um, they have to show me that they actually mean what they say. You can't just produce old school gaming materials and expect me to come flocking back. And I think that's true of a lot of gamers I've spoken with, even the people who are kind of cautiously optimistic. Um, you've got to do more than they have been doing. Anyways, guys, that's my whole take on it. Uh, take it for what it is. Like I said, if you disagree, feel free to leave it in the comments. I'm happy to hear why I'm wrong. If you think I'm wrong. Otherwise, guys, as always, though, follow the three rules: no ad hominems, no picking fights, no leaving college dissertations. Because I'm not going to read your college dissertation comment. I just don't have time for it. Uh, and other than that, guys, we do hope you guys have fun, and we do hope to see you guys around the gaming table at some point.